Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 8th, 2019. Time for yet another show, and, where to begin today? Plenty to cover. The president, that's what we call Donald Trump these days, apparently. Back from his day trip to pay attention to one of the largest issues in the country today, and, we'll just fit two of these little visits in and then come back. He went off to Dayton and possibly Toledo, but also El Paso yesterday to visit with hospitalized victims of the mass shootings there. And in true Trump fashion, they barred the White House press pool photographers from following his tour through the hospitals, saying that the patients there weren't looking for a photo op. They were looking for, I guess, a moment of sincere connection with their beloved president. Of course, immediately after leaving, the White House themselves put out a number of photos of the event. And like all Trump photos, they look like 1950s staged event photos, full of pictures of him and Melania grinning in silly and incongruous ways with people who were recovering in the hospital, having been ridden with bullets, essentially. Some of the people are putting on smiles themselves, but a lot of posed shots with the doctors, nurses, emergency services personnel, etc., who were hanging around as well. And, just a weird and stilted event, as usual, with Trump. And I guess on top of it all, they were prepared for, and this is what it sounds like to me, they were prepared for being attacked on, I guess, either the insincerity of it or the political nature of all of it. By the way, they also, immediately upon departing from Ohio, had ready for distribution on Twitter a campaign ad-style video of the president's visit there, complete with background music and all sorts of things, which is ordinarily the sort of thing you are not allowed to do by law, but we threw out the Hatch Act a while back. And Dan Scavino, his White House social media person, has spent most of yesterday, and I don't know whether he's awake yet today, distributing these videos and attacking Democrats for attacking the president. The interesting part, I think, was that I guess local authorities in most of these jurisdictions opted to do this what I guess in olden times might have been referred to as the mature way of handling these things, putting aside for the day anyway political differences with Donald Trump and allowing the visit to be a functionary thing, a ministerial function of the White House, the president showing up and expressing his sympathies and listening to the victims and whatnot. But they allowed the visit to go forward without making any personal criticism of Trump. But they had already written the script, it seems, for including backlash against the local Democrats for having criticized them. And by all reports, they were muted. And I mean, I think it was pretty obvious, and you could read between the lines, and you knew that these were politicians that disliked Donald Trump intensely, but they were holding their tongues for the purpose of, fulfilling their jobs and not injecting too much of themselves into the story. But Donald Trump just, couldn't handle it and couldn't, I guess he couldn't believe that he wasn't being secretly attacked somehow. So he actually just went ahead with the script wherein he tweets angrily about how disrespected he was by the, angry loser Dems or whatever who were on these visits. But I don't know. It was just, it's weird and upsetting. Daniel Dale followed along in his fact-checking role. I mean, the driest possible way of covering it, but, also factually accurate. And, we've gotten used to the way Daniel Dale handles these things. And he puts no varnish on it here. He starts out this way. Here's a real thing that happened. This is how it went. Based on nothing, the president and aides accused a mayor and senator in Ohio. This would be in Toledo/Dayton. Accused the mayor and senator of misrepresenting how he was treated on a hospital visit to shooting victims. In fact, they'd said he was received warmly. And here's Daniel's fact check. And he continues to tweet. We'll take a look at his full article here. But he adds on top of this thing, and this was, he must have tweeted this thing out yesterday about, here we go, 7:14 p.m. Followed up with another tweet saying in his comments just now in El Paso, Trump continued his criticism of Sherrod Brown and Nan Whaley, that's the mayor of Dayton, calling them, quote, very dishonest people, while repeating his wholly dishonest story about what they'd said today. So that's a hell of a way to start. I was, I guess, in writing this thing up and preparing a post for this morning last night, it was pretty depressing to run through and to see what we were going to be up against today. And I guess I didn't give Bill very much to work with this morning because it was kind of a depressing start. There really wasn't much. I had a hard time thinking last night about what was even entertaining about what he had spent the day doing, and there was nothing. I have a feeling that we've been watching the president unravel mentally for quite a while now, but I think that the pace is picking up. I mean, I may be wrong. This may be indicative of nothing. It may just be his normal morning or his afternoon grousing. It was late. He does the sundowning thing. And maybe that was it. But it's really starting to feel like, I don't know. I mean, for the longest time, everybody has said, there's no guardrails left, all of this. And I think it's largely true. I just thought yesterday was kind of different in kind, but it's hard to put your finger on exactly why. Anyway, let me go with Daniel Dale's fact check here. Trump falsely accused, got to get the pop-up of Anderson Cooper out of the way. Trump falsely accuses Sherrod Brown, Dayton mayor, that's not Sherrod Brown, of misrepresenting his hospital visit. The video that illustrates the piece begins on a shot of the actual mayor of Dayton, Nan Whaley, that we had mentioned before. Here's Dale's piece here. President Donald Trump, his press secretary, and his director of social media accused Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown and Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, both of whom are Democrats, of misrepresenting the reception Trump received from shooting victims during his visit to Dayton Hospital. A Dayton Hospital. I don't know what the name of the hospital is. Facts first, he begins. This is false. End of article. Really, but we go on to tell you exactly why. While both Brown and Whaley criticized Trump's past rhetoric, they were only complimentary about his visit to the hospital. So we're splitting hairs here already. At a press conference following their joint hospital visit with Trump, Brown said Trump was, quote, received well by the patients, was comforting, and did the right things. This is their acknowledging that he did the minimum basic requirements. Like I said, if you read between the lines, and you don't have to, you can read their statements about his other statements, but right here, they're saying, another one of these reviews where, he didn't poop his pants, so, passing grade for the lowest bar of all time, sure. At the press conference and in an interview with CNN, Whaley said victims were grateful to see Trump and that he was treated well by the victims, for sure. Brown did call Trump and his past rhetoric racist. He's right about that. Whaley called Trump's past rhetoric divisive and said it was good he did not visit the district where the shooting occurred because of local anger about him. But neither of the two Democrats alleged that Trump was badly received at the hospital. When Whaley was later shown the Trump tweet in which he accused her of totally misrepresenting what took place inside of the hospital, she responded, "I'm really confused. We said he was treated well. I don't know what you could talk about misrepresenting, so, oh well, he lives in his world of Twitter," Whaley said in a video posted on Twitter by the Cincinnati Enquirer. Now, here's what happened. Daniel Dale explains to us. On Wednesday, Trump, Brown, and Whaley all visited the Miami Valley Hospital in the wake of the Sunday massacre, in which 9 people plus the shooter were killed and at least 27 were injured. So again, Miami Valley Hospital. This is the Miami of Ohio, with which some of you NCAA basketball tournament fans might be familiar. Okay, so here we are. The journalists were not permitted to accompany the president, with Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham saying that the visit was not intended as a, quote, photo op. After Trump, Whaley, and Brown left the hospital, Trump departed for El Paso, Texas, the site of a Saturday mass shooting, and Brown and Whaley held a press conference together. At 2:32 p.m., presidential aide Dan Scavino, Jr., who serves as White House Director of Social Media, lashed out at Brown and Whaley. Very sad, in all capitals there, to see Ohio Senator Brown, comma, ampersand, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, dash, all caps, lying, ampersand, completely mischaracterizing what took place with, as in W/, the president's visit to Miami Valley Hospital today, Scavino tweeted. They are disgraceful politicians doing nothing but politicizing a mass shooting at every turn they can. The president was treated like a rock star inside the hospital, which was all caught on video. They all loved seeing their great president. Dan Scavino, of course, I think intentionally, writes like a 4th grader and also violates the Hatch Act in these tweets. But as we know, again, I mentioned earlier, the Hatch Act is dead. That doesn't exist in law anymore for Republican presidents. Grisham added to Scavino's claim, saying CNN reporter Jeremy Diamond, or telling Jeremy Diamond rather, what I saw those two saying on TV immediately after we left was not what I saw in that hospital. The victims, families, medical staff, and first responders were so happy to have their president and first lady there. I just don't know why that can't be acknowledged. It's disgusting. At 3:48 p.m., Trump himself tweeted a similar claim after receiving, quote, tremendous enthusiasm, ampersand, even love with a capital L. Trump wrote he saw failed presidential candidate, 0%, Sherrod Brown, and Mayor Whaley totally misrepresenting what took place inside of the hospital. Their news conference after I left for El Paso was a fraud. It bore no resemblance to what took place with those incredible people that I was so lucky to meet and spend time with. They were all amazing, he said. It is unclear what Trump was referring to. Asked at the press conference how Trump was received, Brown said he was received well by the patients, as you'd expect. They're hurting. He was comforting. He did the right things, and Melania did the right things. And it's his job, in part, to comfort people. I'm glad he did it in those hospital rooms, Brown said. Brown said in a statement emailed to CNN in response to Trump's criticism, I've said before, Donald Trump is a bully and bullies are cowards. I don't care what he says about me, but the people of Dayton deserve a president more focused on protecting them from gun violence and from protecting his own ego. Whaley, too, was only positive about the hospital visit in the press conference, saying, I think the victims and the first responders were grateful that the President of the United States came to Dayton. She told CNN's Brooke Baldwin in a separate interview that Trump's visit was really appreciated by the victims and that he was treated well. And that's it. I mean, that's the end. Those are the things they said. And I did see it speculated. Someone was just saying, I think maybe they just already wrote the script bashing the Democrats because A, they may have thought that's what the Democrats were going to do, and B, they know that they can go ahead and do that and get away with it, and nobody will stop them, even though it's a Hatch Act violation. That thing just doesn't exist anymore. So they just figured they'd take some shots, I guess. There's really no other explanation for it. Now Daniel also circulated a screen grab of the official transcript of Trump's comments during his about everything. First, we've got the official transcript of Trump's first comments on his amazing day of hospital visits in Dayton and El Paso. And it's always fun to read the transcripts of what the president has to say about these things and give you some idea of where his, whatever it is inside his head that regulates his bodily functions, whatever you might call that. So here's what's going on inside there. The question being, Mr. President, can you tell us about your day and what you've seen? And the president saying, now again, he's visiting with mass shooting, massacre victims here. We had an amazing day. As you know, we left Ohio. Yeah. And the love and the respect for the office of the presidency. I wish you could have been there to see it. I wish you could have been there. Of course, you barred them from going, but I wish you could have been there, except I told you not to go. And it was no different here. We went to the hospital, just came from the hospital. We were there a lot longer than we anticipated to be. It was supposed to be just a fairly quick, and then I guess maybe it occurs to him that I wasn't supposed to say. I was just going to do a brief drop-by, and a drive-by really would have been a totally appropriate thing to do for the shooting victims here. But he begins to realize that he's admitting that he had no interest in being there, right? It was just supposed to be a fairly quick. We met with numerous people. We met with also the doctors, the nurses, the medical staff. They've done an incredible job, both places, just incredible. And the enthusiasm, the love, the respect, and also the telling me, let's see if we can get something done. And Republicans want to do it, and Democrats want to do it. From the few times that he's willing to acknowledge Democrats want to do something, right? And by the way, here's a great hero. This man, the job he did, you all know who he is. Everybody, the whole world knows who you are now, right? And I guess they turn to somebody who is identified in the transcript as Private First Class Oakley, who I don't know whether everybody in the world knows who he is now. Yes, Mr. President, he says. And Trump says, so you'll be a movie star the way you look. That'll be next. Who knows, right? It's a great moment here. Yes, sir. What a job you did. Thank you, sir. There are a lot of heroes. And a lot of people did just incredible work. Now we're going in, I believe, Chief, and say hello to some of your folks. Police Chief Allen here answers, yes, sir. This is one of the most respected men in law enforcement, and I want to thank you very much. Police Chief Allen says, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much, again, says the president. Now, another question. President Trump, you said today was about healing and unity, and you've attacked a number of your critics. Vice President Biden, Senator Brown, Mayor Whaley, as well as various members of the media. Can you explain why you chose to take that tone? By the way, Vice President Biden reportedly made an excellent speech on the subject yesterday. I have seen lots of people giving him praise for the remarks. What I have not seen is the remarks themselves. So I can't actually reflect on that. But I've been watching a lot of people say, even not non-Biden supporters saying, well, it was a good speech. Which I don't really know why you wouldn't be able to afford yourself the latitude to say that about him, even if you don't think that you would vote for him. But okay, some people are a little tighter with their praise. Then others are fine with it. Okay, anyway, so he's asked about his criticism of Democrats. Can you explain why you chose to take that tone? Well, they shouldn't be politicking. Yeah, they shouldn't be politicking today. I had it with Sherrod Brown. He and the mayor, Nan Whaley, they asked to go in. Could we possibly go in and make the tour with you? I said, yeah, let's do it. They couldn't believe what they saw. And they said it to people. They've never seen anything like it. The entire hospital, no different than what we had in El Paso. The entire hospital was, everybody was so proud of the job they did because they did a great job. They did a great job here. This is about the 19th time they've said that, but it's a nice thing to say about people. And then I said goodbye. I took them in at their request. We made the tour. They couldn't believe it. She said it to people. He said it to people. I get on Air Force One, where they do have a lot of televisions. I wonder how that happened. I turn on the television, and there they are, saying, well, I don't know if it was appropriate for the president to be in, et cetera, et cetera. The same old line, and they're very dishonest people, and that's probably why he got, I think, about 0%, and he failed as a presidential candidate. Was he a presidential candidate? Not this time, right? I don't know. We're going to go in and we're going to see some very brave people. I guess he's now in El Paso. And I wanted to meet this hero before I did anything. And we appreciate it. So, substanceless discussion, but just that's the transcript of him turning this into I've been attacked. And also, by the way, of course, making the visit all about, what did you see when you spoke to the victims? And I guess here, the newspaper people are looking for, what did people tell you? Did they say they wanted gun control? Did they say guns in this country are out of control? Did they say anything like that? Or, we got to stop the rhetoric that drives these shootings? He instead says, what was really, what happened in there was everybody loved me. The respect they have for me, it's unbelievable. This is all he can think of, but you know that. All right. This transcript here, let's see, is this going to be worth it? This is a transcript of his public remarks during his meeting with law enforcement in El Paso. And I guess here, maybe we'll find out what's up with the chief here and why he's one of the most respected people in law enforcement. I just want to thank you. We've done some stops today. We went to Ohio and we just went to a hospital. Thanks for the briefing there, genius. I went in a building, and then I got on an airplane, and then I got in another building, and now I'm outside the building. And hello, everybody, and I'm going to get on a helicopter and watch some telly and go on another airplane and go vroom, zoom to America and then into the big house. Great. Well, I just want to thank you. We've done some stops today. We went to Ohio and we just went to a hospital. And they've done an incredible job. How many times does he say incredible today? And we were there for a long time. We thought we would be there for a little time. It's like, come on, a short time? We thought it would be there, for a little time. But the love in that place and the job that the doctors, nurses, everybody, but all over the world, they're talking about the job you've done as police, as law enforcement, as first responders. They're not even talking about that here in America, quite honestly, which is sad because, of course, we're all numb to the mass shooting thing is what that means. But yeah, all over the world, they're talking about what the police in El Paso did. I don't think so. But, not that they didn't do well. It's just, this is all he knows to say about anything. When he opens a hotel, all over the world, they're talking about what a beautiful job we've done with this hotel. And if he's talking to police about a mass shooting, all over the world, they're talking about what a great job you did with the shooting and the killing and the death. The job you've done is, once again, incredible. That's the word for it he always uses. And everybody is talking about it, again. And I wanted to come and thank you because you're very special people. Nobody like you. There's nobody better. There's nobody like you. There's literally every time he speaks paragraphs, there's like 6 words in it. He just says the same ones over and over again. It's very irritating, really. And like I said, it makes it hard for me to tell my kids to stay in school. The police chief says, "Thank you, Mr. President." That's all he is interested in saying. Thank you. He's totally professional in all this. What a reputation you have, meaning good. Because, in his world, reputation is something that little, young, 15-year-old girls have, reputations. I like the ones with reputations because those are the ones that'll let you stick your hands in. All right, well, whatever. You understand what this is what reputation means. Meaning good, a good reputation. You know that. Meaning good. And there's laughter because he's surrounded by his locker room guys. When I say reputation, I mean slut. You understand, right? This time I'm talking about an actual good reputation. Police chief says, I hope so. He's a man of few words, wisely, and all this. But what a reputation. Like a winner. And you showed it this last week because that was something we don't want to have to see again. And I know he went out as a coward. He gave up. He just gave up. So explain what happened exactly. Well, I guess we're talking about the shooter in El Paso who was arrested at the end of this. And the president views this as a sign of weakness, that he didn't go down fighting, apparently. Okay. Police Chief Allen, the coward's way out is the suicide at the end, which is what usually happens with these things. The police chief says, well, when controlled by law enforcement, he saw that he didn't have the courage to confront the law enforcement in a deadly force manner. He gave himself up. We'll be introducing you to some of the officers that... And then his words are inaudible at that point. The president answering, I'd like that. Very good. Very good. Okay, so everything's very good for him. The police chief again finishing up here. And all these people in the room gathered about right now contributed to the success of this successful conclusion in bringing him to justice as far as his arrest. The successful conclusion of 22 people dead. But okay, I understand. Well, that's great. And we have the governor here, our great governor, Greg. He forgot his name. Thank you very much. And Dan, we have. Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor. So he remembers him at the end finally, too. Oh, a little late with the music there, but okay. Finally finishing out. And we have a man. Where's John? We have a man who is very important. 38 years old. 38. John, do the job. Come on up here, John. Yes, sir. We don't even know what he's up there to do. We're counting on you, John, to do the job, right? Yeah, I guess so. What does he do? Well, we'll tell you after this short break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A little late coming back, too. All right. Well, I was just scanning the rest of this transcript, and you know what? We never find out what the job is that John is supposed to do. He never does it, at least in this part of the transcript. And the rest of the transcript is total garbage, but it's being displayed by Daniel Dale by way of explaining how empty his head is, how empty his rhetoric is. And I don't know. I guess we can finish this out. There's not that much left. He says after telling everybody that we're going to find out what John's job is. But we want to thank everybody. And your people are special. I know all over the world they're talking about the job you did. They are not. Stop it. This is really something. Thank you very much, Chief. And then they commence their meetings with the law enforcement personnel. Afterwards, they conclude and they come back out. The president says, so I just want to say thank everybody again. The job you've done is, everybody, incredible. Yeah, exactly. Incredible. And we're with you all the way. That's not actually in the transcript, but people should just do that. Every time if the president says, the job you've done is, everybody in the crowd should just say, incredible, and finish the sentence with him. I can tell you, we've sent you a lot of equipment over the last 2.5 years. Okay. Getting close to 3 years. Hard to believe, because it's about me. But a lot of equipment came your way. A lot of equipment that wasn't being used came your way. Again, can I just... The reason I read these stupid things out loud is to emphasize how he latches onto 2 or 3 words and then says them over and over again and then says it's a paragraph. I can tell you we've sent you a lot of equipment over the last 2.5 years. Getting close to 3 years. Hard to believe. But a lot of equipment came your way. A lot of equipment that wasn't being used came your way. The military equipment that you have that wasn't going to be distributed for some reason. Someday, somebody will explain why. But that was the way it was. But it was a lot different, and you deserve it. But we are with you 100%. And the chief knows. Any problems, he just calls me, and I'm there. You know that, right, Chief? Yes, sir. Applause, and that's the end. A lot of equipment has come your way. I don't know if you know what came your way, but it's equipment. Does everybody know about that? Not a lot of people know about that. Very few people know about the equipment that came their way. A lot of people said the equipment should be coming their way, and then it wasn't. How stupid are we? How dumb is this country, right? Obama is sending no equipment. It's not coming their way. When I get here, what's coming their way? Equipment. That's right. All of a sudden, somehow, I'm such a genius. I'm able to figure out how equipment should be coming their way. And Chief, you know that equipment has come your way. And you know that if you want more equipment to come your way, you should just call me, and I'll move my hands around like flippers for a little bit and then make an okay sign, and then I'll be there, and I'll give you the equipment because it's coming your way. Everybody knows it. The job we've done with the equipment is incredible. That's right. And it's not only is it incredible, but it's coming your way in incredible ways, equipment-wise, is what I'm saying. I just think everybody should know that. And equipment coming your way, incredible. Thank you. It's like the old noun-verb 9/11 thing for Giuliani. He just latches onto a couple of words, whether it's incredible equipment that's coming your way or the job you've done. Or, let me just say that I was going to talk to the police chief, but as it turns out, he's gone to get a drink of water, which is so incredible. People all over the world are talking about the water. Do you know about this? The water that he's drinking in such a terrific, incredible way is being talked about around the world. This is, I don't know. It's a little bit of a waste of time, but every once in a while you just have to remind yourself what adult it occupies the White House. It's just kind of sad. And so I think we can be done with it. I'm just kind of amazed. The job he did with showing us how many people around the world are talking about how incredible he is at being stupid is truly incredible. And I'm just happy to have it. Incredible equipment. Athena kind of gets the picture here. Oh, was there a photo with this? There it is. Ah, okay. There we go. Comes through the... we went with the spit take gif there. Okay. I got you. By the way, Karen D. Reminding us that in El Paso, I guess she's sending me Lawrence Tribe's tweet here, that says, UMC, I guess that's the medical center. I don't know what the UMC is. University Medical Center. There it is. It's right there in the quote. None of the 8 patients still being treated at University Medical Center in El Paso agreed to meet with Trump when he visited the hospital, UMC spokesman Ryan Mielke said. That speaks for itself. And I guess that's really the reason why he wouldn't let the White House press pool follow him in the hospital visits. There was some chance, and I guess he knew it, that they either wouldn't want to meet with no patients would meet with him, or that they would say something to him either confrontational or political. I don't know whether they would necessarily be anti-Trump at that point, but he didn't really want to confront people saying, when are you going to do something about all the guns in this country? And so that's the way they handled it. Oh, Bobblespeak has sent us the old 1970s screen grab from the That's Incredible show, and that's an excellent summation of what's gone on here. All right. We'll circulate I guess both of those, right, just for fun. The spit take that's a famous person, isn't it? I don't know anything about the pop culture of famous people. Is that the actress from the sparkly vampire movies, or am I just wrong about that? All right, well, someone can tell me who that person is. It's very important. They're more famous for the spit take gift than I think the movies that they were in, if I even have the right person. All right. Let's see. Other things happening this morning. Oh, there's been a rash of strange how to read a Trump or Trumpster comment stories so far this morning that I observed and was tweeting around, and a couple other things I can get to, plus some actual news. Let's see, the how to read a Trumpster comment issues from today. I noted the tweet of Jack Jenkins, a national reporter for, RNS, which I don't know what that is. Let's look that up too. Also, I guess a Harvard Divinity alum. What's RNS? I have to go and look now, because that's Religion News Service, which makes sense because of the Harvard Divinity thing. But he had tweeted this story this morning. The other big story, and I guess this reminds me, the other big story of the day is that while the president was trying to have his photo ops in which everything was so incredible and all the equipment was sent their way, he was, I guess he had authorized big ICE raids and mass arrests of, I guess, suspected undocumented workers mostly in Mississippi, as I understand it. So just sort of, on the one hand, okay, I'll grudgingly visit El Paso, Texas, though I guess I won't have a meeting with any of the people who were shot, which is fine by me because most of them are brown. And at the same time, I'll be rounding up what I call illegal immigrants, so that my base won't be unhappy with me visiting with people who had been shot in a massacre, because those people were brown and deserved to be massacred. I think that's what was going on in his head. Anyway, so that a big background story, and an incredible story, actually, being circulated very widely. Local news covered the aftermath of the raids and the number of kids coming home from one of the first days of school. School starts very early down there. Often to no avail, but that's a different story. But lots of kids coming home to find no parents coming home from work tonight because they've been arrested. And just an incredible scene of kids wandering around or going to the parking lot at work looking for their parents. When are they gonna let them out of work? When are they coming home? So really just amazing sights to behold there, and a lot of people circulating this local news report. Very really heartbreaking, and everyone's saying as much this morning. But this is another angle on the immigration story that Jack Jenkins is writing about. Says here, remember that story I wrote about the Trump administration's treatment of persecuted Christians they said they'd protect? This would be persecuted Christians outside of the United States, even though the world's most persecuted Christians are right here in the United States. White people. So look out for that. Anyway, you know how they said they would be protecting persecuted Christians abroad, and how they're deporting some, is this Chaldean? Is that how they pronounce it? Or Chaldean? Chaldean. Chaldean, probably, Christians back to Iraq. Yes, there is a Christian minority in Iraq, and that was a big deal. Like, if they were to flee religious or otherwise flee persecution in Iraq and come to the United States, we'd have their back. We would be protecting them and allowing them to stay here. Even though they were kind of brown and didn't belong here, we would probably be protecting them because Christians, that's what he wanted. That's what the evangelical base wanted to hear about. But then they found out, they worship funny. They don't come to our churches. They're brown. So F them, send them back. Well, he did. Got deported back to Iraq. At least this one case, these folks have faced persecution, but also medical difficulties as well. And one of those deported Chaldeans has reportedly died in Iraq, according to this Politico story. Let's see how long this one is and see if we can't get a quick backgrounder on this. But once again, though, what he was saying was, remember when they said they were going to protect them from persecution and not deport them? Well, once again, as I say, here's another episode of how to read a Trumpster comment. When they say they were going to protect them and not send them back, what they mean is we're not going to protect them and we are going to send them back. Maybe Jack will give us the summary, actually, of this article here. Per reports, he says in this continuance of his thread, he was unable to obtain insulin in Baghdad. He was not only Chaldean, he was also diabetic as well. You can be both at the same time. He's got that capacity. So he was unable to obtain insulin in Baghdad to treat his diabetes. He wasn't going to do much better about that here in the United States, to be honest. He reportedly had never lived in Iraq, though, and did not speak Arabic. What a surprise. Meanwhile, Christian refugee admission, especially from the Middle East, where they're brown, has only been dwindling under Trump. Attaching another article from Religion News. This time, Trump aims to protect persecuted Christians, but some aren't sure he's helping, like probably them. The actual Christians in trouble, not so sure. His third tweet here, the Trump administration deporting people and reducing refugees is, of course, nothing new in general, but the subtext is that helping persecuted Christians was a championed cause among U.S. evangelicals, and Trump specifically said he'd help them. And here is a quote or a link to an article in which I guess he does that. For the curious, here are some refugee numbers, including ones for Christians under the Trump administration, and of course, it's a chart that shows a marked drop in every sort of allowed immigration. And for the super curious, Jack continues, a bit of background on how the deportation of Chaldean Christians to Iraq is a direct result of all things, the travel ban. Remember when we were banning Muslims from this country? Well, as it turns out, if you're a Christian from a majority Muslim country, you're banned too. Ain't that fun? An update here. In tweet number 6, per a local lawmaker, this is a video of a man weeks after he was deported pleading for help. It is the tweet of Mari Manougian, who is listed here, Assistant Democratic Whip and State Representative for Michigan House District 40. Circulating this video. This is a video of Jimmy. I don't know Jimmy, but that's the guy's name here. Taken in Baghdad 2 weeks after his deportation. I'm sharing with permission from Jimmy's lawyers. Jimmy has been in the U.S. since he was 6 months old. He was born in a refugee camp in Greece to Iraqi Christian parents. And I guess this is the gentleman who succumbed to his diabetes, because at the end of Mary Manougian's tweet is an RIP for Jimmy. That's pretty. It's tough to take, but once again, it's just another illustration of exactly what kind of guy he is. He says he was going to protect them. He didn't. He said the ban. Well, I guess he's probably going to use that in court in favor of his travel ban. Well, you see, it's not just Muslims we discriminate against and sentence to death. It's any brown people. Sometimes they're even Christian ones, but are Christians really brown? I don't think so. That's their thinking. All right. Maybe though, let me peek into the Politico article and see if we can't get the full name of this man. Yeah, here we are. Jimmy. Jimmy is Jimmy Aldoud. I'm guessing Aldaoud. Aldaoud, maybe. This is the poor guy who was had no experience living in Iraq, spoke none of the language, and couldn't get any. Probably would have faced religious persecution if he, even if that's not evident from his story. But he didn't have enough time to be religiously persecuted. He died instead from his diabetes. So there you have it. Let's see. Well, they do have him listed here. The immigration attorney representing the family does acknowledge he's an Iraqi national, but he was born in Greece, came to the U.S. as a young child. 6 months old, as we said. He had never lived in Iraq, did not speak Arabic. And, well, the lawyer puts it this way: your blood is on the hands of ICE and this administration. By way of background here, there's a paragraph added in the Politico story. The Trump administration has sought to deport more than 1,000 Iraqis with final orders of removal, including Chaldean Catholics in the Detroit metro area, of which Al Daoud was one. Chaldeans are, I'm going to have to look up that pronunciation, but maybe one of you can help me, are an eastern branch of the Roman Catholic Church who trace their roots to ancient Mesopotamia in present-day Iraq, where they are at high risk of being tortured or killed by the terror group ISIS, exactly who we don't want to feed in all of this, according to the ACLU, arguing in a related immigration litigation. So, well, informative, helpful, sad story, but just thought I would throw that in there. The other, how to read a Trump comment story of the day. It came a little bit earlier. There we are. Another episode of How to Read a Trumpster Comment. This time conveyed to us by the tweet of Don Moynihan, a professor at Georgetown, who notes that in response to the Mississippi ICE raids story that I mentioned at the outset of all this, the other angle on immigration for the day, tweeting around the story I had referred to from WJTV, and the reporter's name here, Alex Love, and that's how you'll find them on Twitter. Alex Love, WJTV, reporting this story happening now in Forest, Mississippi. This was yesterday, of course, where one of the ICE raids happened nearby. Children of those who were arrested are left alone in the streets crying for help. Strangers and neighbors are taking them to a local gym to be put up for the night. So, quite an amazing scene happening there. Dan Moynihan, though, noting with respect, Don Moynihan, not Daniel Patrick Moynihan, but Don, old something else Moynihan, with respect to this story, Paul Ryan, he notes. You remember that guy. He used to be Speaker of the House. He has no control over these things, of course, just the third-ranking constitutional officer in the country. Paul Ryan promised an undocumented family who confronted him at campaign time that there would be no deportation force. Of course, that wasn't the story yesterday down in Mississippi, but he's pointing to a story from January 2017 in the Washington Post. Deportation force is, quote, not happening, Paul Ryan tells undocumented family, who actually had him cornered, I guess, in a room somewhere. House Speaker Paul Ryan, who's no longer House Speaker, thankfully, walked a delicate line on the issue of immigration, one considerably more delicate than President-elect Donald Trump's, during a nationally televised town hall meeting hosted by CNN at that point on Thursday. This article, January 12th, 2017. Confronted by an undocumented Oklahoma woman who is protected from deportation under an Obama administration program, Ryan said he was working with Trump's transition team to find a, quote, good, humane solution for the families protected by DACA, and said there would be no deportation force coming for her family. Maybe he just meant that particular family. Do you think I should be deported? This woman, Angelica Villalobos, asked Ryan with her daughter at her side. No, Ryan said, before Villalobos even finished her questions. I can see that you love your daughter, that you're a nice person who has a great future ahead of you, and I hope your future's here. He gave that assurance moments after telling the mother of a police officer killed by an illegal immigrant drunk driver that he intended to carry out Trump's main immigration priority areas, deporting criminals and securing the border. When he was faced with that person who asked, are you going to stand up for America, Speaker Ryan? Good question. And this is the mother here, Arizona resident Marianne Mendoza, after describing the threat she saw from sanctuary cities. Yikes. So, Ryan playing both sides of the fence here, of course. But, yeah, I promise you there will be this deportation force. It's not happening. I'm the speaker. Come on, you can take it from me. Well, it is happening, And he's not happening. He's not the Speaker of the House anymore. He's gone, but the deportation force is here. So once again, another lesson in how to read a Trumpster comment. Very valuable lesson in all of this. All right. Let's see what else is going on here. Oh, I noticed that I guess David Frum taking note of one of Trump's latest tantrums. I guess this is how he spent his time last night after he was finished in, as he says, the incredible afternoon in El Paso, after circulating the video of himself in El Paso. He gets home on the plane and says, I guess, hey, here's what I watched on television on the plane, on the Zoom ride back to home. Just watched a world-class loser, Tim O'Brien, who I haven't seen or spoken to in many years, and knows nothing about me except that he wrote a failed hit piece book about me 15 years ago. Fired like a dog from other jobs. I saw him on Lion Brian Williams' Trump Slam show, Bad TV. I am so amazed that MSNBC and CNN can keep putting on over and over again people that have no idea what I'm all about, and yet they speak as experts on, quote, Trump. The way to use the quotes there. Good job. On, quote, Trump. Yeah. Same people since long before the 2016 election. And how did that work out for the haters and losers? Not question mark, but period. Not well. So just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that he hated the stupid loser that he saw on telly on his way home. And David Frum, of course, pointing out that Tim O'Brien is one of the few people that have actually read Trump's tax returns. How? It happened after Trump sued him for reporting in his book that Trump was less wealthy than claimed. He knows everything. Tim won that lawsuit, by the way. Mark Bardell responds to David Frum here. And wouldn't you know it, real Donald Trump, he tags him in there, was revealed to be, wait for it, an order of magnitude liar and con artist. That's an odd construction of a sentence, which we all knew, but I never get tired of reiterating it. So there we go. Once again, Tim O'Brien being attacked as the loser for knowing nothing about Trump is one of the few people who've actually seen those tax returns. And I don't know whether we're any closer to seeing those tax returns in Congress yet, by the way, either. I'm still waiting to find out whether that's happening. Okay. Other stories put away in Pocket and elsewhere for our enjoyment. Let me read you this tweet thread. Just generally, I guess, a good summation of the last couple of days and the president's actions following the shooting. It actually comes from Robert E. Kelly. I put it that way because, well, that's his name, true, but that's how you'll find him on Twitter. Robert_E_Kelly. He's a blue checkmarked individual, and you may remember him as the professor of political science from Pusan National University in South Korea, who was, of course, being famously interviewed, I think on BBC at that time, when his young daughter burst into the room, rather confidently striding over towards the camera and winning all our hearts along the way. And I have a soft spot for his analysis, thanks to his daughter. How strong is his analysis? Well, here's a good example. If you weren't sure what to make of his analysis of the situation in Korea, you can judge him on this, because now, all the way from Korea, he's able to, I think, pretty accurately portray what's going on here politically in the United States. Not a surprise. He's American. So I think maybe he's Canadian, for all I know. He didn't have a British accent, though. We saw him on BBC. Anyway, the last few weeks, he says, of the Trump show have been more awful than usual, but also inadvertently revelatory about Trump's coalition, although he uses an @ sign there, and I can only assume he meant about. Revelatory at Trump's coalition, I guess. I don't know. Not the way I would put it. If you've paid attention, you've suspected this stuff for a long time, but because Trump says the quiet parts out loud, a lot of GOP, or GOP as we sometimes say, masks have definitely dropped. Not only does he hit the nail on the head, by the way, in this thread. Not hard to do. I mean, the president is flagrantly obvious about what he's up to. But he has a great turn of phrase in here, and we'll identify it when we get to it. He goes on to say, gun rights advocates now clearly think that routine massacres are an acceptable price to pay for access to long guns. The president's teleprompter speech was so forced and hackneyed, and his desperation to blame anything, video games, mental health, the culture, hate, except easy gun access, was so transparent that no one serious will ever buy that stuff again. I wish that would really be true. That doesn't mean gun control will happen, and here's the turn of phrase coming. Fox and empty state senators will see to that, but at least the debate is over. The insincerity of these arguments is now undeniable. So that'd be a great outcome if really true. I'm not certain that it is, but I love that turn of phrase, empty state senators. And I haven't seen it elsewhere before. I actually looked, just sort of scanned over Twitter. It may be that things have been described as empty states before. I'm sure that's probably the case. But the turn of phrase, empty state senators, not absolutely original to him, but not something that's been widely circulated. So I don't know. We'll attribute that one to him. And I did see lots of people responding to that particular tweet in this tweet thread and saying, wow, I really like that turn of phrase. And I do too. So I'll continue as we get ready to take our top of the hour break with his tweet thread and see how much we can fit in before we cut out here. The NRA and company, as he says, now clearly prioritize gun ownership over public safety, and they will say anything to defend a capacious reading of the Second Amendment. A lot of Trump voters are racist, he says in point number 2 here. Again, this wasn't too hard to figure out before. The Tea Party pretty clearly wasn't motivated by limited government or anything like that. But Trump has ripped the mask off, just as he did with his blatantly fatuous speech on the shootings. Journalists have danced around calling the president racist for 2 years and have hedged for decades on racism as a motivation, despite stuff like Willie Horton, going way back on that one, and the Southern Strategy. Those days are over now. Economic anxiety is the standard talking point to deflect this. That's impossible to invoke after Send Her Back caused no drop in Trump's approval rating. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, I wonder if we had Greg Dworkin with us at the moment, he might have, perhaps, I don't know, whether we'll have to check back in with whether we could dispute the assumption that Send Her Back caused no drop in Trump's approval rating. And that's possibly true, I guess, long term. And nobody really expected a precipitous drop or anything. But I guess we'll have to analyze that when he rejoins us next week, because there's competing theories about whether or not it had an impact. I guess overall and in the long term, I mean, Greg has made a repeated point of showing us that his approval and disapproval, or at least, they stayed pretty steady. At least his approval rating has. I guess it's his disapproval rating maybe that, if anything, has fluctuated at all and increased slowly over time. But these things remain pretty steady. But when you break down different demographic groups, I think, is where you begin to see the impact. Overall, there's not much, but I guess that stands to reason, right? When the pool is larger and larger, the deviations from the norm are going to be smaller and smaller by comparison, I guess. Well, but lots of reporting and discussion over the last couple of days about the differences in the way he's playing approval and disapproval-wise in, say, the suburbs in suburban America versus exurban and rural America. He's never played well in urban America, of course, but lots of discussion over how he's getting killed in the suburbs, over the gun issue, over the immigration issue, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be back on that track perhaps next week. Anyway, Robert Kelly continues on here saying, as he did, the mask is off with regard to economic anxiety and the Tea Party. Impossible, he says, to invoke after Send Her Back caused no drop in Trump's approval rating. It's apparent now that Trump wants the GOP to be like the National Front. Evangelicals couldn't care less, by the way, he says in point number 3. about personal virtue. Here's another Trump silver lining. Trump's personal behavior is so appalling, spiteful, mean-spirited, selfish, adulterous, that evangelical support for him auto-demolishes any ethical or virtue argument they make. We never need to take moralistic arguments from the religious conservatives seriously again. You never really should have, but okay. They're just another interest group now with no principled belief in elevating our debased politics. I find this sellout the most disappointing. There is something noble in the notion that politicians should strive for personal virtue. But evangelicals sold their soul to Trump for judges and access. Point number 4 here, and these don't match with the number of tweets. We're on the 9th tweet, but the 4th point here, just in case you're following along trying to keep score. It's all about the tax cuts and judges. Trump is woefully unfit for the office. Lots of retired GOP officials. I'm in the mode here when I want to say GOP today. Lots of retired GOP officials like Boehner and Ryan pretty clearly see that. But they swallowed all the racism, misogyny, narcissism, norm busting, and so on just for that juicy 2017 tax cut to their donors, which is, I guess, what the Soul Cycle guy is trying to cling to at the moment in another of this morning's or yesterday afternoon's big, flashy political stories. But we probably won't be covering that one very much. Again, you probably suspected plutocracy before. W's 2001 and 2003 tax cuts were upwardly redistributive too, but Trump is so awful that the congressional GOP's willingness to stand with him anyway has starkly revealed its donor class preferences. Point 5 here. Budgetary restraint is for Democratic presidents only. Trump's Keynesianism, exploding deficits, I wouldn't necessarily say he adheres to Keynesianism here. He's just a spendthrift idiot. That's not the same thing. That's weird. Anyway, exploding deficits and bullying of the Fed for low interest rates to help him get reelected are now so obvious as to be undeniable. Again, you kind of already knew this, but maybe the Tea Party was serious and Romney and Ryan really did think we were becoming Greece. Well, that story is gone now too. Trump deficit spends with such abandon that this GOP plank is revealed as insincere also. Kind of makes you wonder what's left. Trump is woefully unfit and a terrible president, but his inability to lie convincingly is weirdly useful, ideologically at least. Yes, Trump lies and flim-flams all the time, but when he does, he almost always signals his insincerity via his body language. He turns orange, like he's a chameleon. When I'm lying, I turn orange. See? It works, right? He says the right stuff for a moment at Charlottesville or after the shootings, but in such a fake reading from the teleprompter manner that you can easily decipher his true beliefs. And in the case of Charlottesville, he goes on to blurt out his true beliefs. This inability to mouth, appropriate platitudes, to lie convincingly, has inadvertently revealed a lot about the GOP coalition and destroyed a lot of its most useful pretenses, e.g., crime, not race, is the concern, or mental health is the culprit of gun violence. This myth-busting is a progress of a sort which the GOP will come to regret after Trump is gone, and no one knows what it stands for besides racism and upper-income tax cuts. Aligning with Trump is a Faustian bargain, and the bill will come due. I hope so, but sometimes I wonder. But by diminishing useful, deflective GOP or GOP myths, Trump is accelerating that reckoning. And that's the end. Well, maybe. I don't know. Somebody else chimes in and says, blah, 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 mainstream lying drivel, same old sheet, as they put it. I don't think so. I think he's pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I wanted to share that with you and just say he's doing a good job over there, all the way from Korea, figuring out what the hell's going on over here. Let's see. Other stories that I should be sharing with you. Oh, you know what? Let's touch on this one briefly, too. Roll call, getting down to business, reporting on the Congress that is out on recess for now. still working in the background to get ready for, well, remember, they return in September and then have the September to October sprint to take care of appropriations in order to avoid government shutdown or partial government shutdown. We'll be back up against that wall pretty soon. And speaking of walls, Senate GOP plans to divert health and education funds to the border wall because of all of the money that Mexico is spending on it or something. $5 billion would apparently be moved here and set up a clash with the Democratic House over fiscal 2020 spending. You recall the other day being yesterday, and I guess the previous week too, on Wednesday when Joan was visiting with us and telling us that, about some of the problems in the various moving parts of the budget deal, but that one of the bright spots was an agreement to equivalency between domestic discretionary spending and military spending, and at least not shortchanging the domestic spending end of things. Well, of course, Republicans have been working in the time since we learned about that to put a dent in that, to take some of the shine off of that silver lining. Senate Republicans are looking to pay for President Donald Trump's border wall, in part by putting about $5 billion less in the largest domestic spending bill. Several people with knowledge of the process said that move signals a likely fight over wall funding, as well as over Trump's ability to reprogram or transfer funds to the border when the fiscal 2020 appropriations process resumes after Congress returns in September. According to several people familiar with the process, Senate Appropriations Chairman Richard Shelby, an Alabama Republican, wrote an allocation for the fiscal 2020 labor HHS education spending bill that's about $5 billion lower than it would have been to provide funding for the wall. Congress and the White House reached agreement on a budget deal raising discretionary spending caps for fiscal 2020 and 21, clearing the way for the Senate Appropriations Committee to begin marking up spending bills. The panel has held back action thus far in anticipation of a bipartisan, bicameral top-line agreement finally reached late last month. Trump's push for funding to extend barriers on the southern border, combined with many Democrats' opposition to it, is likely to produce a clash in the fall. Congress earlier approved $1.3 billion in wall funding for fiscal 2019. Trump asked for an additional $8.6 billion in his fiscal 2020 budget for border barriers, $5 billion in Department of Homeland Security construction accounts, and $3.6 billion for the Pentagon to assist with the project. Trump earlier this year declared a border emergency and tapped existing statutes to shift $6.7 billion, mainly from Pentagon budgets, to fund the wall construction. The Supreme Court last month cleared the way for the administration to divert $2.5 billion out of defense programs for the wall, blocking a challenge from environmental and other groups. Shelby's provision for wall funding is not surprising. At the very least, it sets the table for a negotiation with the Democrat-led House, which did not include any wall funds in its Homeland Security bill and sought to tie the administration's hands in transferring military and other funds to the border project. In the Senate, it takes 60 votes to end debate to pass appropriations bills. While many Senate Democrats are expected to oppose $5 billion in wall funds, one former GOP aide said the labor HHS education bill may be generous enough to attract Democrats' support despite their objections. Although it's $5 billion less generous than it's supposed to be, so we'll see. I would guess the labor HHS allocation is still pretty generous relative to last year, which was also a pretty generous allocation, the former aide said, on condition he not be identified. It makes sense for Shelby's allocations to skew right, since the House's will surely skew left. Senate Democrats also will have the chance to argue for changes more to their liking in a conference over House and Senate bills. A Democratic aide said a brewing dispute over the White House's review of foreign aid spending could also affect appropriations discussions in the fall. Over the weekend, the Office of Management and Budget asked the State Department and Agency for International Development to temporarily cease spending for a range of programs in order to, in OMB's words, ensure the money is being spent wisely. Oh, that's a good idea. Some fear that could lead to the White House attempting to rescind or cancel the spending. The aide said if the White House attempts to roll back appropriated spending, Democrats may be more resistant to any administration efforts to transfer funds in fiscal 2020 appropriations bills. All right, well, we'll see whether they actually get that gumption up. But it sounds like the attack is already underway on the domestic spending side, where they thought they might have had a deal worked out. And, of course, Mexico's still not paying for the wall. And we'll have another fight on our hands over border wall funding, regardless of trying to take that problem off the table in agreeing to some relatively stupid terms, I thought, as outlined by Joan last week. Okay, let's see. Let's skim over what we have here and see what grabs our attention. Okay, more about the president being super excited about being treated like a rock star. I think we've covered that pretty well. Let's see, there's some Epstein news, but perhaps we'll save that for a little later, or maybe save it forever and never get around to it. Oh, you know what? Here's a good follow-up, a good setup for next week, and a good follow-up to the mention I had made about suburban Americans, the suburban demographic, reacting to Trump in a very different way. Not only are the polls apparently showing that Trump's numbers tanking in the suburbs, but this I thought was an interesting angle on the analysis here. CNBC reporter John Harwood tweeting the other day, in Nancy Pelosi's last speakership, back after the 2006 elections, Dems from rural districts made up 1/3 of her caucus. And that was about the same, relatively even numbers as between rural districts and suburban seats, each representing about 1/3 of the Democratic caucus. Now, suburban seats, where Trump's really getting clobbered in the polls, suburban seats are half her caucus, and rural ones are just 1 in 7 out of the entirety of the caucus. And that makes gun control, John Harwood here says, a much safer idea for Democrats to push. And, of course, probably on a number of fronts, just about everything on which you could oppose Trump, or even with respect to impeachment, perhaps at some point, the same dynamic could come into play as we find out more and more about the demographics of the suburbs and how they feel about the impeachment question. But a big change in the composition of her caucus as between post-2006 election and post-2018 election. And pretty safe bet to say that she's relatively aware of that, and it may be that in the end, when the history of the speakership is written, it will become clearer exactly how she handled things differently with respect to that different composition. Okay, let me grab a couple other stories here. Do we go with some of the weird Epstein stuff? Maybe we'll transition there by way of noting for the rest of the week. And tomorrow, the tweet of Rebecca Bauhaus, White House reporter at Wall Street Journal, to which we do not have a subscription, so we may not be able to read this story, but she's tweeting her news. Major Wall Street banks, including Deutsche Bank and Bank of America, have given congressional committees investigating Trump thousands of pages of documents related to Russians who may have had dealings with Trump, his family, or his business. That sounds pretty interesting. Let's see how much, if any, the Wall Street Journal will allow us to read. Oh, it's one of those stories that they think is important enough for us peons to be able to read without paying. Excellent. Banks hand over documents on Russians possibly linked to Trump. Some documents are related to Russians who may have had dealings with Mr. Trump, his family, or Trump Organization. That's the header and subheader here on the piece by Jean Eaglesham, Rebecca Davis O'Brien, Siobhan Hughes, and David Benoit. Those are the pronunciations we're going with on this one. Major Wall Street banks have given congressional committees, they're just giving them this stuff, investigating President Trump, thousands of pages of documents related to Russians that they're willing to turn over. Why not? Who may have had dealings with Mr. Trump, his family, or his businesses, people familiar with the congressional probes said. Some banks are also giving documents related to Mr. Trump's businesses, the Trump Organization, etc., to New York State investigators. People familiar with the New York investigation said. Wall Street firms, including Bank of America Corp. I love when they put this in corporate speak, and then they give everybody all the stock ticker prices after. So Bank of America, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, among the group here, have recently provided thousands of financial documents related to Russians who may have had dealings with Mr. Trump or his family or his business to congressional investigators, according to people familiar with the congressional probes. I feel like we read all this already. The investigators are working on a joint probe into potential foreign influence on Mr. Trump and his family by the House Financial Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. More information will likely be handed over in coming weeks as the banks continue to respond to subpoenas sent in April, the people said. So it's not just giving it to them. They were subpoenaed and they're complying. That's good news. Separately, Deutsche Bank, Mr. Trump's primary bank, has turned over emails, loan agreements, and other documents related to the Trump Organization to the office of New York Attorney General Letitia James in response to a civil subpoena sent earlier this year, according to people familiar with that investigation. Ms. James's office has also in recent weeks received financing documents and emails from Investors Bank Corp., the people said. The Short Hills, New Jersey regional bank handed over thousands of pages in response to a civil subpoena demanding information on a 2010 mortgage on Trump Park Avenue, a condominium building in Manhattan owned by Mr. Trump, the people said. Short Hills, New Jersey, firmly inside the suburban window, by the way. From personal knowledge, a neighboring town to my own hometown. Mr. Trump has filed several lawsuits seeking to block lawmakers and states from getting access to his bank accounting and tax records. The documents being provided by the banks could give investigators some of the same information Trump is trying to block. The legal fights could drag on for months, if not years, and that, of course, is the president's strategy, says, Sakrishna Prakash. That's not actually all that difficult, is it? A law professor at the University of Virginia. Not that I got it right, but that's who we're talking about. Anyway, the Democrats are seeking to investigate, embarrass the president, and he's trying to delay his personal finances becoming public. Mr. Trump is fighting in court to try to stop Deutsche Bank and Capital One, two of the banks with the most information on his business, from handing over information to Congress. A federal appeals court in New York is due this month to consider a challenge by Trump, his three oldest children, and his business to subpoenas from the House Intelligence and Financial Services Committees seeking records from the two banks. The banks have said they aren't taking any position on whether they should be compelled to provide information. Another federal appeals court last month considered a bid by Trump and the Trump Organization to block a subpoena issued by the House Oversight Committee seeking 8 years' worth of financial statements and other records from Mazars USA LLP, Mr. Trump's longtime accounting firm. Mazars said in a statement it will respect the legal process and fully comply with its legal obligations. Trump also last month sued the Democratic-led U.S. House Ways and Means Committee, as well as the New York Attorney General, to block the disclosure of years of his state tax returns. Committee investigators are reviewing the documents provided to Congress so far by the Wall Street firms. House Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters, said in an interview in June, "We've gotten information from a lot of banks." Senior Democrat House Intelligence Committee officials said last month they are looking for evidence of foreign influence on the administration, whether it was during the campaign, the transition, the inauguration, or currently. Democrats are looking in particular for any evidence of Russian money going into Trump properties, according to a person familiar with the matter. Certainly seems like we've heard about a lot of that. Trump has accused New York's Ms. James, a Democrat who took office in January, of harassing all of my New York businesses to make him look bad. No, nothing you need to do to make him look bad. Ms. James responded in a tweet that no one is above the law, not even the president. Trump has publicly declared that he was exonerated by former special counsel Robert Mueller's nearly 2-year probe into alleged Russian influence. You know what that's all about. Mueller in his report said he wasn't exonerating Mr. Trump. Gee whiz. The New York Attorney General's subpoenas to Deutsche Bank and Investors Bank Corp. Are part of a civil investigation which could yet yield fines or other civil actions if the office alleges illegality. The Deutsche Bank documents relate to 3 mortgages the bank extended to Trump businesses, as well as proposed financing that didn't go through. People familiar with the New York investigation said. CNN reported earlier this year that Deutsche Bank had begun providing financial records to the New York Attorney General. Trump is seeking to quash the congressional subpoenas by arguing that Democrats are exceeding their constitutional powers by conducting investigations not directly tied to legislation. That legal argument couldn't be used to contest information demands from the New York Attorney General. Lawyers not involved with the investigations said. The congressional and state investigations are seeking different types of information. The congressional subpoenas are being contested in court as they are seeking a broad range of financial documents from the Trump family. And in contrast, the documents being turned over to the New York Attorney General involve loans to the Trump organization, according to people familiar with the New York investigation. The information already handed to Congress by banks includes records on Russian business people connected to the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016 involving members of Trump's family. People familiar with the congressional probes said that meeting, set up at the request of billionaire Russian Azerbaijani real estate developer, that would be Agalarov, or at least his son, Amin Agalarov, became a focal point of the Mueller investigation. The investigation didn't establish that anyone affiliated with the Trump presidential campaign knowingly conspired with Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election, though. The congressional subpoenas are also seeking any information that the banks may have about Russians connected to conversations the Trump organization officials had about a potential real estate development in Moscow. That we know all about. The Trump organization had explored the possibility of a new Trump Tower in Moscow before and during the campaign, and Mueller reported on the discussions about that project. We'd like to find out more about what was going on down in Palm Beach as between him and Jeffrey Epstein and their fight over the property that was eventually sold to, was it Dmitry Rybolovlev? That too will, I'm sure, be forthcoming in maybe not directly out of these investigations, but somewhere. They've never been able to turn that particular tap off all the way. All right. Anything else we can fit in before our break? Let's see. We can make mention of this anyway. I don't know how much of it we'll get through here, but I thought this was something to keep an eye on as well. White House drafting executive order to tackle Silicon Valley's alleged anti-conservative bias. We keep hearing that being alleged by conservative activists, that this or that social media platform is inherently biased against them, or shadow banning them or whatever. It occurs to me as they now move towards an executive order to take on Silicon Valley's alleged anti-conservative bias that it seems almost as if they were interested in making sure that the net had some sort of neutrality associated with it or something like that. Again, so it struck me that this too was something that Trump's own Obama derangement syndrome had ruined for himself. He so hated Obama that when he found out that Obama was or the Obama administration had made moves anyway in the directions of net neutrality, that obviously this was going to have to be something that the Trump administration would have to oppose. And they dismantled it. And now here they are complaining that they are the victims of anti-conservative bias in social media out there on the net. And they have to reinvent the wheel that was set in motion by the Obama administration, but destroyed by them because of Obama derangement syndrome. Similarly, it's happening in almost everything. Things that Trump has been triggered by because they were initiated by the Obama administration that he smashes and then has to put back together again, whether it be, whether it be NAFTA or I can't even remember some of the other examples we were putting together yesterday. However, I guess if I were able to find my Twitter feed again easily and simply, I could scroll back and find out. But on the fly, it's just not happening. But at any rate, you get the idea. It's a recurring theme with Trump that he finds out that Obama has done something, decides it must automatically be horrible, undoes it, and then needs to overdo it again. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. The thing I had forgotten for whatever reason was that another of the Obama derangement syndrome situations that Trump had gotten himself into, you may remember because it's been in the news in the last couple of days. How could I forget? Trump's been musing over blaming the various massacres on mental health issues in this country. And suddenly, out of nowhere, saying that we may want to make it more difficult, to place more restrictions on the abilities of those suffering from mental illness to get their hands on dangerous weapons of mass destruction and machine guns and the like. Assault weapons, of course, is how we'll term it when it comes to legislation time. But also those with some memory of the past may remember that actually under the Obama administration, he too took executive action, and it had to be executive action because he couldn't move Republicans in Congress to actually act on this very popular idea of restricting access to assault weapons or guns of any kind for those suffering from mental illness. And but because the Obama administration had set it in motion, the immediate reaction of the new Trump administration was to dismantle it. And now, of course, I'm looking very strongly at undismantling that and rebuilding it and, I guess, rebranding it as a Trump thing, just as he did with NAFTA and just as he's now having to do over net neutrality, I guess. And there's probably about 15 other examples that I'm already forgetting about. All of this because he's a vindictive moron and automatically despises anything Trump or anything, I despise almost automatically anything Trump does, but he despises anything that Obama did. Obviously a bad idea, smashes it to bits, and then realizes, dang, I needed that because my predecessors have all been relatively careful and balanced about how they tinkered with public policy. Whereas I just throw temper tantrums at everything and figure that'll make things better. But in fact, it's weird. They make things worse. And then I have to do them all over again. All right. Just thought I'd point that one out. Let me see. Should I maybe get a little bit more out of the Politico piece here? White House drafting executive order to tackle Silicon Valley's alleged anti-conservative bias. Maybe we can just glean a little bit more from that and have an eye out for this. Margaret Harding McGill and Daniel Lippman on this piece. The White House circulating drafts of a proposed executive order that would address allegations of anti-conservative bias by social media companies, according to a White House official and two other people familiar with the matter, a month after President Donald Trump pledged to explore, quote, all regulatory and legislative solutions on the issue. Which is to say, he hasn't explored anything, but someone reminded him that he was supposed to do something, so now they're going to go with the executive order, go the executive order route on this thing. And I guess maybe he's right. Maybe he's convinced that he can't get what he wants legislatively, either because it's impossible to do or the problem doesn't exist and Democrats won't cooperate with it in the House. I don't know. Anyway, let's see. I've got my eye on a few other items flying by on the screens here, but let's see about this one. None of the three would describe the contents of the order, which one person cautioned has already taken many different forms and remains in flux. I think what that tells us is that they're working on another one of those meaningless platitudes that are dressed up in executive order sounding language, but which order, various bureaucracies inside of the executive branch to keep on keeping on, but in a strongly sort of way, I guess. Just keep doing what you're doing, but do it more strongly so that we can say we're doing something. We saw that on a couple of healthcare issues. You should just make sure that you're looking out for, fraud, waste, and abuse or something like that. We've seen it in a lot of his executive orders. It's just something to do. Signing an executive order sounds like something has happened here. Anyway, its existence and the deliberations surrounding it are evidence that the administration is taking a serious look. They're really not evidence of that, but taking they're spending more time than they should looking at wielding the federal government's power against Silicon Valley. That's not something they should be looking at all. If the internet is going to be presented as this egalitarian platform, and most of Twitter is liberal cesspools of venom, then at least the president wants some fairness in the system. The White House officials said, imagine that. The Republicans are going to be responsible for bringing back the fairness doctrine. But look, we also think that social media plays a vital role. They have a vital role and an increasing responsibility to the culture that has helped make them so profitable and so prominent. I guess I should caution you here, by the way. You shouldn't walk away with the idea that there's a silver lining to all this, that the Republicans will bring back the fairness doctrine. They won't. They might actually try to call what they're doing the fairness doctrine. But remember that all of this is overlaid with gimmitarianism, which is at the bottom of everything. So what they're really talking about here is that we will fix it so that it is illegal, or practically illegal anyway, to discriminate against conservative viewpoints. But it will be still perfectly legal and in fact encouraged for you to discriminate against liberal viewpoints. We're not going to be fair to everyone and in so doing, use this rising tide to lift all boats, even though that was supposed to be an economic message. Instead, we are going to use this rising tide to, 1, lift Republican boats, and 2, set afloat torpedoes, which are intended to sink Democratic boats. A rising tide lifts Republican boats and sinks Democratic boats even lower beneath the surface. That's our aim here. And so raise that tide very strongly, he will argue. And they may just try and disguise things by calling it the fairness doctrine at that. But I guess that would be another thing that Republicans at one point destroyed and then find out, oh, crap, we actually want it back, but is there any way we can restore it for us and not for them? We'll see how that works out. 2 other people knowledgeable about the discussions also confirmed the existence of the draft order. None of the 3 people would say what penalties, if any, the order would envision for companies deemed to be censoring political viewpoints. The order, which deals with other topics besides tech bias, is still in the early drafting stages and is not expected to be issued imminently. I guess between the lines there are his legal advisors, who probably can't actually settle on language about punishments because they realize the implications of a rule like this and either refuse to set it down in writing or keep arguing that it can't really be done. We can get away with something here. We can write an order that looks impressive and maybe is even written up in script on parchment and everything, and you sign it and flash it around and it looks totally official, and you can say I'm working very strongly, but we can't actually make the text of the order do something. On the other hand, I guess they could just make it say whatever they want and just lose in court with it, but they're probably having difficulty getting the thing drafted and signed because the president and his proxies are pushing back in the discussions and probably saying, I think we should be able to execute the CEOs of companies I don't like. Can you get that in there? Well, we'll get back to you, Mr. President. The president announced at this month's social media summit, it was really last month, I guess, that we were going to address this, and the administration is exploring all policy solutions, a second White House official said Wednesday when asked about the draft order. Accusations of anti-conservative bias have become a frequent rallying cry for Trump and his supporters, seizing on incidents in which tech platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Google-owned YouTube have banned people like InfoWars founder and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, or faced accusations of squelching posts by pro-Trump social media personalities Diamond and Silk. The companies have denied the allegations of bias, though they say they have blocked or removed users who violate community standards policies. They have also faced complaints from liberal activists that they're too slow to remove hate speech, a category that some says includes Trump's own tweets. The issue took center stage during a White House gathering in July in which Trump railed against censorship. Yeah, right. In front of a room full of online conservative activists and directed his administration to explore all regulatory and legislative solutions to protect free speech and the free speech rights of all Americans. Just this week, Trump warned that he is, quote, watching Google very closely because of all that free speech, citing the case of an engineer who has claimed the company fired him for his conservative views, which is a thing that companies, I guess, can do. Governments, though, under free speech rights are not supposed to, but whatever. They've confused that issue since forever, and no surprise there. By the way, I don't think it's noted in here, but I did note in my reading, my general reading in the past couple of days, something relevant to this. This paragraph brings up that the issue took center stage during a White House gathering in July in which Trump railed against censorship in front of a room of online conservative activists and directed his administration to explore blah, 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 all regulatory and legislative solutions to protect free speech and the free speech rights of all Americans, of course, derived from the First Amendment, from wherein we derive the freedom of the press as well. It should be noted that the immediate aftermath of the gathering in July and the room full of online conservative activists immediately resulted in the Rose Garden confrontation between Sebastian Gorka and a reporter for Playboy magazine, of all places, in the Rose Garden that almost erupted into violence and which has since resulted in the revocation of the press pass of that reporter. So, mind you, this is a gathering at the White House to talk about anti-conservative bias in the in online media. And Trump goes on to rail against who knows what. What did they say? Rail against censorship and say that he's going to do everything he can to protect free speech and the free speech rights of all Americans, and then immediately ejects reporters and revokes their White House press passes for having the temerity to argue with Sebastian Gorka, who the White House had to fire and eject last time, but brought back for this important event in the White House and in the Rose Garden afterwards. Just thought that was worth noting. The White House effort may be complicated by skepticism in some agencies involved in the discussions about tech policy. The Republicans at the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission have said publicly they don't see a role for their agencies in policing companies' online content. Because small government, remember that? The FCC and FTC have joined the Justice and Commerce Departments in discussions about the potential bias crackdown. Imagine putting Wilbur Ross in charge of this. Wow. Not to mention Bill Barr. There's very little in terms of direct regulation the federal government can do without congressional action, and frankly, I think that's a positive thing, said John Morris, who handled internet policy issues at the Commerce Department's National Telecommunications and Information Administration before leaving in May. He added, although the government may be able to support and assist online platforms' efforts to reduce hate and violence online, the government should not impose speech regulations on private platforms. As politicians from both sides of the political spectrum have historically urged, the government should not be in the business of regulating speech. But I say they should, and very strongly. But don't you see that would ruin the country? I don't see that, actually. One potential approach could involve using the government's leverage over federal contractors, a tactic the Obama administration used to advance LGBT rights. A 2014 executive order prohibited federal contractors from discriminating against workers on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Trump earlier this year signed an executive order meant to promote free speech on college campuses by requiring schools to agree to promote free inquiry in order to receive federal research funding, something the schools were already supposed to do. Concerns, but again, one, the executive order done for show, and two, ordering nothing more than what was already supposed to be happening. Another example of this. Concerns about harmful content online following last weekend's mass shooting in El Paso, Texas, could become part of the discussion around the draft order on tech bias. The suspected gunman had been linked to a racist manifesto that shortly before the shooting appeared on 8chan, a fringe website known as a hotbed of white supremacy. Online screeds tied to two other gunmen in mass shootings in California and New Zealand have also appeared on 8chan. Trump said Monday that he wants the government to work with social media to develop tools that can detect mass shooters before they strike. It's an ambitious way of stating it. And the White House has invited internet and technology companies for a discussion on violent online extremism with senior administration officials Friday. Oh, that would be tomorrow. We'll see whether that happens. Or whether they just bring them a fire truck to play with. The first White House official said the administration sees no conflict between demanding that online companies allow free speech while expecting them to scrutinize people for signs of violence. They have a role, if not a responsibility, to monitor the content on their sites to ensure that people aren't threatened with violence or worse, and at the same time to provide a platform that protects and cherishes freedom and free speech, but at the same time, I feel like we've said that already, yes, does not allow it to descend into a platform for hate, the first White House official said when asked about the draft executive order. But the federal government's options on combating online bias are limited by the First Amendment. Another obstacle is a provision of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which both protects online platforms from liability for content their users post and empowers the companies to remove content without fear of liability. That provision, Section 230, has increasingly come under fire from lawmakers of both parties frustrated with tech companies' content moderation practices. The administration could look to NTIA, the branch of the Commerce Department that handles communications policy, but that agency lacks regulatory authority and could simply convene interested parties to explore the issues. And while the Justice Department has announced a sweeping antitrust review of whether tech giants are harming competition or stifling innovation, antitrust cases have not traditionally been used as tools to address complaints about online speech. The prospects are also bleak at the independent agencies, the FCC and the FTC. Section 230 doesn't give the FCC a regulatory hook to act on, and the Republican commissioners who lead the agency have already taken a hard line against one major government effort to regulate broadband providers' conduct, the Commission's Obama-era net neutrality rules. And when Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg wrote an op-ed proposing the creation of a third-party body, or third-party bodies, to set standards governing the distribution of harmful content, Republican FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr derided it as a plea for the government to police speech. Outsourcing censorship to the government is not just a bad idea, it would violate the First Amendment, tweeted Carr, who is a Trump appointee. I am a no. Conservatives have also spent decades opposing any attempt to revive the FCC's old fairness doctrine, which required broadcasters to be balanced in their programming on controversial issues. FCC bureaucrats can neither determine what is fair nor enforce it, the Heritage Foundation said in 1993. Totally different time, of course, but okay. Republicans at the FTC, which punishes companies for unfair or deceptive acts, also have said they don't see a role for the agency in policing allegations of social media bias. During an FTC oversight hearing in the Senate last year, Senator Ted Cruz argued that a tech company could be considered actively deceptive if it appears to be a neutral public platform and then engages in censorship. But Republican Commissioner Noah Phillips said the FTC's antitrust and consumer protection authorities are not authorities to police the First Amendment itself. Sounds like there are still some people who believe in at least a somewhat limited role for their agencies, if not the federal government as a whole, but we'll see whether they are forced out or otherwise retire or fall out of buildings in the upcoming months. Okay. Well, maybe they will find themselves in this situation that Serena Blaze shares with us in the form of the tweet from Zeke Johnson. Let me open this thing up and make sure I got it saved for you guys to share later. Zeke Johnson, Senior Director of Programs at Amnesty International USA, tweeting that someone here is a hero. An opinion piece. I can no longer justify being a part of Trump's complacent state, so I'm resigning. A Washington Post op-ed here, I guess, from Chuck Park, who resigned effective today, I guess, from the Foreign Service. Looks like it might be of some interest. Let's skim through this. I was 26, newly married, and more than a little idealistic when I set off for my first diplomatic assignment almost a decade ago as a member of the 157th class of commissioned U.S. Foreign Service officers. According to a certain type of right-leaning conspiracy theorist, that would make me part of the deep state, a shadowy government within the government that puts its own interests above the expressed wishes of the electorate. Adherents to this theory believe that thousands of federal workers like me are plotting furiously to subvert the Trump administration at every turn. Many on the left, too, hope that such a resistance is secretly working to save the nation from the worst impulses of President Trump. They have it all wrong. Your federal bureaucracy under this president, call it the complacent state instead. Like many in my cohort, I came into the government inspired by a president who convinced me that there was still some truth to the gospel of American exceptionalism. A child of immigrants from South Korea, I also felt a duty to the society that welcomed my parents and allowed me and my siblings to thrive. Very logical. Over 3 tours abroad, I worked to spread what I believed were American values: freedom, fairness, and tolerance. But more and more I found myself in a defensive stance, struggling to explain to foreign people the blatant contradictions at home. That would be tough, wouldn't it? In Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, I spoke of American openness and friendship at consulate events as my country carried out mass deportations and failed thousands of dreamers. I attended celebrations of Black History Month at our embassy in Lisbon as black communities in the United States demanded justice for Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and the victims of the mass shooting at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. And in Vancouver, I touted the strength of the United States democracy at the consulate in 2016's election night party as a man who campaigned on racism, misogyny, and wild conspiracy theories became president-elect. Since then, I've seen Trump assert the moral equivalence of violent white nationalists and those who oppose them, denigrate immigrants from S-hole countries, and they have to print that again, and separate children from their parents at the border only to place them in squalid detention centers, concentration camps. But almost 3 years since his election, what I have seen is organized resistance from within. To the contrary, 2 senior Foreign Service officers admonished me for risking my career when I signed an internal dissent cable against the ban on travelers from several majority Muslim countries in January 2017. Among my colleagues at the State Department, I have met neither the unsung hero nor the cunning villain of the deep state lore. If the resistance does exist, it should be clear by this point that it has failed. Instead, I am part of the complacent state. The complacent state sighs when the president blocks travel by Muslim immigrants, shakes its head when he defends Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, averts its gaze from images of children in detention camps, then it complies with orders. Every day we refuse visas based on administration priorities. We recite administration talking points on border security, immigration, and trade. We plan travel itineraries, book meetings, and literally hold doors open for the appointees who push Trump's toxic agenda around the world. So when I read a recent New York Times op-ed calling for the public shaming of the mid-level functionaries who make the system run, I squirmed in my seat. We rank and file, like the Justice Department lawyer who recently endured public scrutiny for defending the administration's terrible treatment of detained children, don't like to be called out. And when we are, we shrink behind a standard argument that we are career officials serving nonpartisan institutions. We should be named and shamed, but how should we respond? One thing I agree with the conspiracy theorists about, the deep state, if it did exist, would be wrong. Ask to read the commission of any foreign service officer, and you'll see that we are hired to serve during the pleasure of the President of the United States. That means we must serve this very partisan president, or else we should quit. I'm ashamed now of how long it took me to make this decision. My excuse might be disappointing if familiar to many of my colleagues. I let career perks silence my conscience. I let free housing, the countdown to a pension, and the prestige of representing a powerful nation overseas distract me from ideals that once seemed so clear to me. I can't do that anymore. My son, born in El Paso on the American side of that same Rio Grande where the bodies of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughters were discovered, in the same city where 22 people were just killed by a gunman whose purported, quote, manifesto, and I think everybody's switching over to the word screed instead these days, echoed the inflammatory language of our president, turned 7 this month. I can no longer justify to him or to myself my complicity in the actions of this administration. That's why I choose to resign. Very interesting and important piece there to add to the puzzle. We'll keep the door open for other such suggestions here. By the way, with this comment here, to the story that we circulated earlier from Jack Jenkins about the Iraqi Christians who were finding themselves turned away. I guess wondering whether such people would qualify for asylum in Canada. Currently, we hold the U.S. as a safe nation for purposes of asylum, but for at least 20 years, there's been discussions here about whether that should still apply. It's a good question, and don't know what to tell you. I certainly can't speak for the Canadian government or the Canadian people, and we got enough Canadians among our listeners that they might chime in. I'm sure that they would throw their doors open to refugees like that, although how much responsibility they might feel for cleaning up American messes, I couldn't tell you. It's a frustrating thing to have to do, for sure. All right, almost about time to wrap things up here, and maybe one quick glance back into Pocket to see whether there's anything else that needs to be brought up or teased for later in the week. Definitely have some more Epstein developments, but that's just not super important news at the moment until they're arresting new people. And still got to get back around to more on the Russia collusion angles with respect to what has happened in both in this country and in Great Britain as well in their Brexit voting. So I keep teasing that one and then putting other newer stories in the way of those. But like I said, some more developments on the Epstein front. I guess Leslie Wexner is now out there alleging that he was taken advantage of in all this by signing over power of attorney over everything he owned to Jeffrey Epstein. And I mean, I'm not sure how to feel about that. But Leslie Wexner is, well, by definition, actually by legal definition, is probably one of those sophisticated investors who's really just not going to find a great deal of protection ordinarily under the law, because it's presumed that they know what they're doing and they're given more leeway to enter crazier, riskier investments that the law would otherwise ordinarily prevent from being offered to ordinary investors by virtue of his sophistication. On the other hand, I mean, what other explanation is there but that he was duped when somebody with that much money signs over all complete power of attorney to some, charming idiot who's also a filthy child molester on the side? doesn't make a great deal of sense, to say the very least. Anyway, time now to turn the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and perhaps we'll get around to the latest Epstein developments later in the week, and then also maybe the serious international problems of Russian interference in free elections. But in the meantime, how about this for the Thursday show? Let's see what's on tap for today. It might be comforting, he says, to think of white supremacists as lone wolves, but white supremacy is actually a widely held belief in America. Well worth exploring, of course, and you all know that. Mick Mulvaney admitted to illegally relocating federal employees to get them to quit their jobs. They worked on that State Department guy, but he didn't get relocated. Trump's war with California could cost the U.S. economy $400 billion by the middle of the century. And there's more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this one? North Korea is playing Trump for a fool. There's no other way to play him, by continuing to test its missiles. And in Mississippi, food processors, as we told you, paid $3.5 million to settle sexual harassment suits. These are the same ones that ICE just raided. How strange.